Welcome to Northern Powerhouses, our business success story series of interviews where we discuss with local business leaders their backgrounds, their successes and challenges, and what drives them forwards. And today I'm delighted that we have with us Dave Tucker, the founder and CEO of Glean. So Dave, if you'd be kind enough to first introduce yourself and Glean and tell us a little bit more about how you help your clients.
Thanks, Chris. First of all, pleasure to be here. So a bit about Glean. We are a learning technology company. We produce a platform for helping students essentially help them have the confidence, motivation, and ability to develop effective study habits and learn better ultimately. We operate internationally, so a large part of our customer base, in fact the majority, is in North America. We sell to about 500 universities and colleges there, and then also we sell to governments as well. And our primary background is supporting students with learning disabilities. So until we became Glean, which was in July, we were called Sonison, and our focus at that point was very much students with learning disabilities and essentially selling to institutions and governments so that they could offer better support. Now, as we're Glean, we have a much more expansive focus and vision, and really we're looking to help everyone. And I think the core observation, which we focus the business around, is that actually the world is full of information. You know, you can teach yourself almost anything. You've got YouTube, there's amazing resources on the internet for free, but also you have MOOCs, Coursera, Skillshare, you have online universities. The world of learning is changing really rapidly. Yep. And the problem we want to focus on is, well, how do we help people study better from that information? So that's a bit about Glean. In terms of my background, I often joke this is the only full-time job I've ever had, because it is. I did a degree in Japanese, which perhaps we'll talk about later, and that definitely taught me a lot about learning. I did a degree in Japanese, and just as I was going to university, my father, whose background is as a speech researcher, had an idea. He found out that students in the UK with disabilities were being given digital recorders to help capture their classes, and he'd worked with speech for most of his career, and he was like, well, speech is not an accessible format. Like, how are you going to study from that? And so he came up with an idea for a tool where you'd import those recordings and you could study more effectively from them. And that was our first product, Audio Note Taker. And so I kind of got involved in my first year of university, helping do market research, recording my classes. During the summers, I kind of did project work. I always thought I would move to Japan and live in Japan. But upon graduating, I decided not to do that, and kind of saw the opportunity with my father. And at that point, it was just my father and one developer, as probably the greatest opportunity I'd ever have in my life to do something really interesting. And within a few months, I became utterly convinced that the ideas that we had could really impact a huge amount of lives. And that was 12 years ago. So it's been a long journey since then.
Wowzers, what a story. That's amazing. And I'm just a couple of things I want to come on to, but how did you connect with Japan and Japanese? I'm just interested the connection or the link there.
Yeah, I always get asked that. And I'm 34 now. I made the decision when I was like 17, 18. I honestly can't remember. At school, I was really interested. I was really interested in kind of East Asian cultures generally, and there were several major influences. One of them is growing up, we always had international students stay with us over Christmas. We lived near Bristol, and my parents, I think just as an act of generosity, wanted to give international students an experience and not be alone at Christmas time. And we had a lot of Chinese students, and I think that started my curiosity. And then I got into cinema, first Chinese cinema, then Japanese cinema. And then when it came time to decide what to do at university, it was like, well, I don't want to do any of my A-levels any further, but I'm really interested in this and I want to learn the language. Why don't I do Japanese? So I just did it.
Well, that's wonderful. That's absolutely fascinating. Goodness, I'm just processing. I'm just think. I'm not going to try and think of another question on that, but I might do later on. And I noticed, and one thing, what a great story. So we've got a Yorkshire tech business with its primary market in the US. How cool is that? You know, yeah, that's just a great story right there. And I know obviously you're expanding, and I believe you're moving shortly into Leeds Centre in new offices.
Yeah, so we've been based in Leeds Centre, but as we've grown and as the vision's grown, you know, we really want to establish ourselves as one of the core contributors in the Leeds tech community. And so it was obvious that we needed to expand during the pandemic. We definitely outgrew our office, although everyone working remotely kind of helped with that expansion because we didn't need desks for everyone.
Yep.
And our philosophy is that although remote is definitely here to stay and will be a component of our business moving forward, I think it's really important for us to have a home and for people to have pride in that home, have a sense of belonging in that home, and for us to effectively participate in the Leeds community. I think to have a space where we can gather together and build personal connections and share with each other is really important. So we're going to be moving to the docks. There's a new development in the old casino there. And we're going to be anchor tenants of that project, of that building. And it's probably worth saying we don't have a huge amount of clarity or plans right now, but part of our aspiration is definitely to host events and share what we've learned with the community, not just in software development, but digital marketing and, you know, a whole host of different things.
If I could add to that, I'm sure a lot of people will be fascinated around developing business in the US or North America, I should say. You did say North America. I'm a big fan of Canada, so I mustn't forget that. Because I would imagine, well, I know several businesses that are doing or planning to do it. And I personally had my own tech business, and obviously tech 20 odd years ago is totally different to tech today. But we did some work in the US, and it was very much the message then. And I'd be interested to get your views that the US was quite colloquial, and they preferred to buy from Americans, preferred to buy from Americans. And what's your experience in that?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey for us, and I think we had the benefits of time in some ways. It's been about a decade since I first went to the US and started meeting people and thinking about, well, how could we build a business here?
Yeah.
I would say there's pros and cons. One of the hardest things for UK businesses, and it's worth saying, when we started out, we were warned that the US is the graveyard of UK businesses. Like, a lot of people see the big market opportunity. Yep. They think, okay, like, if we nail it, we could be massive, and probably naively don't understand how challenging that can be. And I think the US wanting to buy from the US is definitely a factor. I think things are different in subtle ways that you probably don't anticipate. And probably the hardest lesson to learn is Americans are really enthusiastic and positive in a way that British people simply aren't. And so you'll go to conferences and people will be like, this is amazing. This is the best thing I've seen at this conference. Like, I've never seen anything like this before. And you're like, great, okay. And you'll have that like 100 times over a couple of days. And you're like, well, guys, like, we can't fail here. And then you don't get any sales off the back of it, and you wonder what's happening.
Yes.
So that's definitely an experience we had. I think in terms of our success, what's worked really well is not necessarily something that people can replicate, but it comes back to that community aspect. We invested a lot of time in building personal relationships with people within the industry we were selling into. And slowly, I think that led to us just being a name that people knew about and trusted.
Yeah.
And then you have to go through the task, which is kind of the standard business process of saying, well, who's our target persona? You know, where are we going to focus our attention? What's the problem? How do we position ourselves to solving that problem? What are the the barriers and friction points and mapping out that whole marketing sales process. But I do think that involvement in the community facilitates that, and also can help with the trust and overcoming that barrier of, you're a foreign company.
Yes. Yeah. That makes perfect sense. And yeah, as I say, I'm sure people would love to know more about your experiences. So if that became a topic of something that you could get involved in, I think that'll be really valuable. And I'm sure I know several businesses that would love to hear more about that. So a lot of people say we often learn more from our challenges than our successes. What would be some of the biggest issues that you've had to overcome over these last sort of 12 years or so?
Yeah, I do think, so maybe you'll relate to this. I think some of the hardest challenges as you go on this journey are often personnel related, but I don't think that's worth talking about in this podcast. But I do have a couple of stories around this. So one of them was actually in the early days of our journey. We were just, I don't know, definitely less than 10 people, maybe 5 people, very small company. And as I said, we built this product which took recordings made by digital recorders. You can import them into our software and then get more value from them. And we'd been talking to the makers of the digital recorder in the UK, the market we were selling into. Olympus basically had a monopoly.
Yeah. And
so we're chatting to them, and I just thought this would be a great partnership opportunity. There was so much synergy between the products. And that's true, but they saw it as an opportunity to release their own products and compete against us.
Right.
So they essentially completely copied our very unique idea for solving this problem, and launched their own product into the market and called it a very similar name. And intentionally, my opinion is intentionally tried to confuse the market, as we were still somewhat fledgling at that point in time. And honestly, this felt like it could be a business killer.
Yes.
If the big boy, when you're starting out, it is a bit scary, especially if you're in a product business, because the big companies have a lot of influence and they could do anything they want, really. So what happened there? Well, we had a weakness, which was that we were only on Windows, and they were releasing a Windows and Mac version. So I think we managed to completely build a Mac version of our software for the Mac in 8 months, and I think it was single-handedly done by one developer almost, Dan, who's still with us. And I know that he clocked in more overtime over that period than his actual contractual hours. Like, that's how intense it was in that period. So a huge amount of credit to Dan, even though that was 10 years ago, but yeah. And then it was, well, what is our strategic weakness? And I explained, we were the accompaniment to the digital recorder. That was our weakness. Our value prop was like, we support that. That's their value prop. How do we differentiate? And this was honestly a complete turning point for the entire business. Glean would not be here today if this hadn't happened. I can guarantee that. Yeah. Because it forced us to really consider what is the bigger vision here? What is the bigger vision? And for me, it was about learning. And it came at a time where I'd started to get to know it. I mean, this will be a theme of this podcast. It is really about who you meet and the conversations you have. But I'd got to know some trainers within the industry. And there was this one trainer in particular, a lady called Sarah Jane, who had a kind of different approach. So in the market, students would be given this technology to support them, and with it would come training packages. Yeah. And the trainers would normally go through, like, this is what this software does, this is what this software does, this is how you use it. But she didn't do it like that. She was like, okay, you're a student, you need to write an essay. This is your study process for how you build an essay, and use this software to do this software to do this software to do this, and this is how they all connect together. And there was essentially study strategies.
Right.
And I was like, when you say it, it's like, well, that's a no-brainer. Like, that's how everyone should do it. So we worked together to build our study strategies using our software. And yes, you could see our software as an accompaniment to these digital recorders, but it was basically a word processor for speech. It helped people work better with speech. And so, and our target market were, and our users were students with dyslexia. And students with dyslexia, they essentially have a print disability. You know, print text is a harder struggle. It's a barrier. It's much more natural and easier to work with information as speech for some people. So, so we developed these study strategies. We talked about presentation skills. We talked about brainstorming, like verbally, and we basically connected it into a process. And yes, the end outcome would always be text, but how can you better utilize and harness voice and speech to capture ideas and process ideas and all of that. So we spent a lot of time in those early days exploring those ideas. And that was this repositioning of our product to a learning tool. And at that point, specifically a learning tool for people with print disabilities. And then the third thing, so it completely changed the direction of our product. And then the third thing is just thinking about our company branding. You know, they were a really big, well-known name, but kind of this distant Japanese cold corporate. Yeah. What were we going to be? We were going to be ourselves, for one, but we could be the friendly, local, fun, personable company. And I think that laid the foundation for me really grappling with that identity of who we are and brand for the first time in a way that we kind of didn't need to before that.
Fascinating story. The thing that comes to mind for me is it is, you know, ultimately it's not just about the product or the idea, it's about what's behind it. So, you know, Olympus copying what you did almost, this is almost word for word. It was just, ultimately it was just a product to you that to them that fitted what their other products. Whereas you, I don't know if you're familiar with the book Start With Why by Simon Sinek, and that's what I was hearing was that you know your goal wasn't to produce a piece of software, it was to help people learn better. When people sign on to that, it's you know that's what people are signing on to. It feels like it's that passion to help people learn.
Completely agree. And you know, I talked about the threat of the big companies. They can't compete against that, though, can they?
No,
they just can't. And I think that was a lesson for me about the importance of brand. And you know, you can check around these businessy words, and probably when you say brand or branding, lots of things come to mind. But it's people understanding your why. It's people understanding it, and as soon as they hear your name, that's what they associate with you, and that's the most important thing. And that's something competitors can't copy.
Absolutely. You know, it is just a commodity that they have. Let's copy this, and didn't get it, which was not about having a piece of software. It was about helping people. Wonderful. What a great story. I mean, what a great story. Again, brought me to mind. I'm quite a visual person. I've got 2 Olympus digital recorders somewhere. Obviously, don't need them anymore. In fact, I hadn't heard the brand name for a little while. I'm sure they're still around, but the need for them now is, I guess, superseded by the apps we have on our phones, I would imagine. So, a fascinating story. I'm interested to know who or what has had the biggest influence on you in your career so far.
It's a great question, and I think I could approach this in a number of different ways. I mean, my journey is I didn't work under someone. I've never had a boss. I've never had a manager. You know, I've never had a mentor in that kind of way. It's kind of been the people I've sought out.
Yep.
I would say there's so many people that have helped along the journey. Probably the first one worth calling out is my father, for kind of giving me the opportunity to work with him when I was a 22-year-old that knew nothing, but just had a lot of energy and passion and like stubbornness, I guess. I would say also, Dave Sankey's our COO. He's a friend from university who joined us, and you know, for the last 6 years, and especially when my father retired and left the business, and he's been my partner. And we are very different people, but that's really important in leadership of a business. You
Yep.
do need people to balance you out. And I think
Yep.
for that reason, we make a great team. And I've learned a lot from him because we're so different. And I think he's definitely rounded off some of my harsher edges. And he'd probably say that I've influenced him as well. And then it's the people along the journey that have kind of shaped the way the business has gone. I've been fortunate enough to have had a mentor who was a leader in a larger software company based in Cambridge, who's now the chair of our board. He's provided a lot of help and a lot of encouragement, actually. And then I want to just call out two people that are huge parts of the story. I may not even know it. So one of them was the person who made me commit to doing this in the first place. And I said after a few months, I realized the potential and the impact we were having. Well, that came because I stayed up till like 3 a.m. at a conference with a Scottish assessor, one of the guys who meets students and like makes recommendations for the software. And like, he just basically told me the impact that even our very basic software was having on students. And he was like, essentially he was like, Dave, your product's great. It is kind of adds so much value. Students love it, but people don't understand it. And the company that we're using to promote and market it, they don't understand it either. And it's true in that it was only their sales rep in Scotland that really was, evangelizing about it. And we only really had much traction in Scotland. And he just gave me a crash course in how the market worked, what we needed to do. And I woke up the next morning and was like, we got to do this ourselves. And at that point, we'd had a 50-50 relationship with a distributor where they did all the sales and marketing and we made the products. And then despite there was still a 50-50 split, I started doing the marketing and sales. And that's when we started really taking off. Well, it took many years, but like that was the starting point. So that guy, Andy Lees, really gave me the conviction in the UK market. And then there was a similar gentleman in the US market that gave me the conviction about what we were doing there and what we needed to do. And again, a random encounter at a conference, but it wasn't actually at the conference itself. The conference was in New Orleans. It was the Association of Higher Education and Disability, which is kind of the industry group for disability support services in universities in America. And yeah, so I think it was my second year at that conference, and we were just in like a jazz bar. I don't know if you've been to New Orleans, but
not yet, but it's on the list.
Yeah, there's like jazz bars all over the place, and we're in this one, and I distinctly remember that the music was amazing. But I just kind of bumped into him, and we were like, oh, I'm here for a conference. Oh, I am here for conference too. Or which one? Oh, it's the same one. And then we just got chatting, and he was a huge Green Bay Packers fan, and my brother knew about American football, but I didn't, and they talked about that. Well, it turned out he was based in Madison, Wisconsin. We just signed a partnership with an educational distributor that had a business development unit, and that they were going to help develop the US market for us. Now that partnership didn't work out, but we were based in Madison, Wisconsin. So I was flying to Madison, Wisconsin frequently for that anyway. And I developed this friendship with this guy, and he was so passionate about students in a way that I just haven't seen before. And he would spend hours kind of ranting about the injustices, but it taught me so much, and it taught me about the opportunity and all the things we could try to fix. But it also gave me conviction that like we had a solution that can make a big difference. And then he also brought me into his university. I delivered training sessions with his students, and I saw face to face the struggles the students, especially with learning disabilities in community colleges. I think it's really hard sometimes to really understand some of the challenges people have, and that really opened my eyes. And then also you get the validation of seeing how the software helps people, and those experiences over those couple of years, 2012 to 2014, I'd say, a long time ago, but they gave me the energy and the conviction that has taken us to this point. So yeah, really important people.
Wonderful. Absolutely great stories. And again, just that, you know, just hear the conviction and the passion coming through from you, and obviously from them through you. So, and that, you know, for me, that's one of the absolute key ingredients of a successful business, is the passion and the drive to deliver whatever it is that we have, you know, our vision and our values. And once we get clarity on that, you know, watch out. I think it's, you know, just absolutely watch out. So what would you say you've learned about yourself over your journey so far?
It's an interesting question, because, you know, the majority of my adult life has been doing this. So it's kind of this intertwining everything I've learned over the last 12 years. I would say it's quite a humbling experience, and maybe this is just part of any adult's maturing process. But I think each year I come to learn more about, I come to understand and embrace my weaknesses as a person. And I think part of the entrepreneurial spirit is an unwavering assumption that I can do anything. But that's really not true. And leading and growing an organization is challenging, it is complex. And I do think you need to make peace with the fact you're going to get a lot wrong and you're going to be bad at certain things. But the great thing is you're part of a team, and they're going to be great at the things that you're bad at. So I think that's the journey for me. But I think that reflecting on it, that's probably the main thing. And this is definitely a work in progress still.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think for me, you know, I think Brian Tracy talked about the most successful teams and organizations are the ones where everyone in the team spends most of their time doing the three things they're really good at and they really love. And I think it's, I perhaps slightly just what you said, just in my opinion, is I can do anything, but I choose only to do the things I really love and I want to do. If that makes sense, it's like, yeah, okay, but why would I want to spend time and effort and energy doing something that I really don't like? So why don't I find someone that loves it? Because they'll, for everything I dislike, someone will absolutely love it. And that's where you get great teams, isn't it? Is when you've got, and you talked about Dave earlier being that, you know, different and opposite to you, and how those things, and I've seen that many times with partnerships, is the most effective ones are often when people are actually quite different, and you sort of think they want to be similar, but then you've almost got the same, you know, you're in danger of having the same identity multiplied twice. Whereas if you've got two different views and identity, you tend to develop and explore different areas than we would just by ourselves. So no, great learning, I would suggest. So looking forward, I'm you know, I can see you going from strength to strength at the moment. So I guess, what does the future look like for you and for Glean, and what challenges might you face moving forward?
I would describe ourselves as an incredibly ambitious business. You know, I look to the hyper successful tech companies. We're part of Upscale, which is the Tech Nation program for supporting scale-up businesses. The kind of program after that is for unicorns, and like we're definitely on this track to being hopefully a very significant large tech company. I mean, it'd be great to be a unicorn, which is a $1 billion company. So once you have that level of ambition, the challenge I think becomes even greater, especially within tech, which is changing so fast and there's so much competition. And I would actually say that is our core challenge. The world is changing rapidly. The pandemic and I guess the switch to remote work, but not just that within education. I think the switch to remote learning was kind of this emperor's new clothes moment for a lot of people, where you kind of stripped back the facilities and the social aspects of university in particular, and you're just left with the teaching and learning experience, and you're like, wow, is this it? And also, is this what I'm paying all this money for? So I think it's just been this moment of like realization, and we can never go back to what it was like before. And ed tech especially, but I would say this is true of probably the tech sector and digital sector in general. Everyone is taking a more digital first approach.
Yes.
Digital transformation. What does this mean? Well, it means there's a huge amount of money being invested in those areas. That means a lot more companies appearing, much higher competition, but it also means a lot more competition for skilled people.
Yes.
So that's kind of the context for our core challenges. One, the world's changing rapidly. That's going to create opportunities, but it also means everything's a lot less predictable. What was true before isn't necessarily going to be true moving forward. And no one quite knows how that's going to pan out. And that's hard. Like, you can be as smart and as strategic as you like, but there's always going to be a bit of luck in the next couple of years in terms of success. And then being able to hire and grow a great team, and with the skill shortage, that's just a challenge.
Yes, I see that a lot in across business in general, but certainly in tech especially, I think, right now. You know, it's great. I was just thinking, you said earlier about there's so much information available and things are changing, and it reminds me of the story that Tony Benn, Lord Tony Benn, who was a Labour MP, when he retired from Parliament, he did a lot of he did a lot of speeches at primarily at colleges and universities, and so educational establishments, and he'd always start apparently he used to start his talks with saying, we all wake up every morning knowing less than we did the day before. And of course there was all the lectures around, but we can't say that. We're trying to help people learn knowledge, and his point was, there's so much more information available every day than there was previously. Our percentage knowledge of it has to reduce, and so anything we could do to improve that is really key. And it's interesting. Look, I mean, I know, you know, we got to a reasonable size. We've got about over 100 people in the first business, and you know, outwardly we were successful, and we were quite successful, but the amount of luck that came at the various points, and I can almost look back and see 3 or 4 different points of luck or points of change that were just really was a step change. And if we hadn't have been in the right place at the right time, or talking to the right people, you talked a lot about talking to, if we weren't talking to the right people at the right time to come up with the right idea, then probably we wouldn't have seen those step changes. And I think, look, I don't think anyone would honestly say that most businesses achieve it without an element of luck. It's all purely planned and purely visioned from day one, because we can't really, because the world's changing so fast, isn't it? As you say that, if we try and vision 5 years from now, I just feel that's almost impossible, especially the tech world.
Completely agree. And, you know, we don't talk about how much luck involves in success, but it's absolutely true. You can increase your luck by meeting new people, getting out there, trying things. I think there's a lot you can do to improve your chances of getting lucky, but there's definitely luck involved. But also, as an entrepreneur, I think you have to have a conviction that everything's going to work out, and it's almost your destiny to do this thing. Because if you don't have that unwavering feeling, then I think the challenges can be pretty tough. Completely
agree with that. It's that, you know, well, I guess Henry Ford said it best when he said, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right.
It's so true. It's so true. It's so true.
It really is, isn't it? And it's like, no, I can't, you know, it's how it's converting can I into how can I, and that, you know, that asking that question, the how can I rather than can I, is just fundamental. I believe anyway. Well, that was absolutely fascinating, this discussion so far. I guess just thinking about sort of last couple of questions is, and I'm interested, especially because I think, if I'm right, you picked up the fact you came from, you know, out of college straight into running a business and founding a business. What would you say to anyone that's thinking of starting a business right now?
Yeah, well, I'm going to have a bias to saying go for it, do it, because you'll only learn by trying. And so yeah, just do it. But obviously everyone's going to be in different circumstances, and you've got to be smart about that. And there's a lot of risk involved. And when you're young, it's much easier to take that risk than when you're older. So I would definitely acknowledge that. So what do I say? Well, first of all, it is hard. And you said it earlier, Chris, like you have to have that passion and conviction in what you're doing and how you're doing it, because that is absolutely required to take you through those challenges. And I think on top of that, you've got to have a really clear understanding of the problem you want to solve, like who cares about that problem, and an understanding of why you're better than alternatives. I think having clarity over that is kind of the foundation for them being able to take that leap and step and say, okay, I'm going to risk a lot in making this work, and I might fail, but I'm going to do everything I can to not fail. And then with that piece about I might fail, I think you need a good support network. And there's two angles to that for me. There's the friends and family and mentors and those that care about you as an individual, who may not ever understand what you're going through, but are there for you regardless. That's really important. I'd also say the stronger your professional network, the easier your journey is going to be. If you have people you can turn on to ask a question, people you can say, I need a website building, do you have any recommendations? You know, so many of your problems, if you have someone you trust to ask, who can then network you to the right people, life becomes so much easier, because like it takes so much time to spend ages researching everything, and just having people to hand that can help you out is going to make a big difference. And especially when you're trying to get into an industry, I would say this journey took so long and has been so hard because we started from zero, you know, didn't know anyone, didn't know anything, nobody knew us. Every single connection had to be made from scratch. And I think the more you start off with like a network of people you can turn to, maybe even your first customers, you know, if you can get the ball rolling with people, that's going to help so much. Like, don't underestimate how important that is for getting going.
Brilliant. That's really fascinating advice. I'm absolutely aligned with that. It's just, let's find people that know. Funny enough, I've got a couple of friends that one of whom is an ex-client of mine who's built and sold the business. And you know, if there's anything primarily tech-based now, I used to have a tech company, but I have no idea on technology anymore. Ask him, and he knows. And I just go, well, whatever you're having, whatever you've got, I'll have. Can I have that? Because you'll have done all the research. You'll know exactly what's right. And although we're different, and you're me, I'd rather trust your judgment than any lack of judgment I would probably have, or lack of research I would probably do personally. That's fascinating. And I think the failure piece is quite important. I know the founder of my organisation, Brad Sugars, he told me quite some time ago, he's a very successful man, and he said, I'm as successful as I am because I've made more mistakes than anybody else I know, rather than despite. And that was really interesting when he said that. And I think it's the willingness and acceptance that there will be mistakes and failures and problems on the way that helps us. I don't know if you feel that too. It's having that willingness to say, look, it won't always be perfect, but if I don't make decisions, take actions, then we won't get anywhere.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there's a caveat to that, of course. And that caveat is you've got to reflect on your mistakes and learn lessons from them, and try not to repeat them again. I think if you keep making mistakes and you keep doing it, then that's never going to help. But I mean, this is true this is true in any kind of development. This is true in personal development, but this is also true in innovation. You know, the world needs people to try new things that might not work, and maybe it doesn't work for a good reason, but then you say, well, why didn't that work, and can we do anything differently? And if you do that enough times, then the chance of it working in the future increases and increases. And this is how innovation happens. This is how we create businesses that provide jobs for people. This is how we move the world forward and improve quality of life and solve challenging problems. And it requires people to risk failing and learning from it. So it's just, I think, I think it's just an essential part of how the world works. And if you can internalize that for yourself and see your life in the context of the journey you're on, like give yourself, in the same way you give your business a 10-year goal, like see yourself in a 10-year process. Like any one given mistake, yeah, emotionally it's going to feel bad, but in 10 years, are you going to feel that way? What good can come out of that? What is your end journey? And I think, yeah, I think that the more you can do that, the better you're going to feel about all of the mistakes you make along the way.
Absolutely. No, yes, and you're absolutely right to sort of adjust what I said. It is about there isn't a failure as long as we learn from them. You know, I think it was Mandela said, I think he said, I never lose, I either win or learn. And I think, yeah, so I totally agree. But
we had a head of sales who would only call it win or learn. Like that's basically it. Yeah.
But as you say, as long as we do learn, it's when you said it and you bang on to say it, it's that it reminds me of there's one episode of The Simpsons, and they've got I'm trying to think the daughter's name. I can't think the daughter's name at the moment, but she's doing a laboratory exercise with a rat, and then you're basically the rat, and she's comparing it with her brother Bart, and the rat comes up and she'd electrocuted a piece of cheese. Obviously, it's a cartoon, isn't it? And the rat would sort of come up, bite the cheese, and go, oh, and walk away. I think it did it twice before it learns, and then it keeps catching back to the same experiment with Bart with a donut, and it's just the whole episode. You can come in, oh damn, and yeah. So we've got to learn from those mistakes moving forward. Brilliant. I mean, we've almost probably done it already, but my final question to you, which I'm really fascinated to hear the answer, although I think a lot of things you've said already, it would be the answer, is what would be the best advice you could give to an 18-year-old Dave?
Yeah. Probably be intentional about finding role models and people you admire, and be curious about learning from them. And I think when you're younger, well, this is my experience at least, like it's not necessarily natural to see adults as people that you could one day be. For me, there's just this like psychological gap between the world I knew and the world of kind of adults post-university and working life. But I think the younger you start to see people as people who've gone through a lot of experience, that have something to teach you, that you might aspire to be like, and use that to help you shape your own personal development. And that's something I didn't do that I wish I had done. I think I did a lot of things that I'm glad I did, in terms of, you know, just getting stuck into everything, not overthinking, trying to like create as much as I can, give myself huge challenges, push myself out of my comfort zone in every opportunity. And, you know, I said we would probably talk about my Japanese later. I think it taught me so much, but one of the biggest things was it pushed me out of my comfort zone. You know, I did 1 year of learning Japanese. I started from scratch at university. The next year I was living in Japan with a Japanese family, studying at a Japanese university. And the first couple of weeks was so horrible. Like I'd never experienced in my life, the awkwardness of not being able to communicate with anyone, but having to, not having English, being social mistakes all the time. Like you talk about failure, like every 5 minutes you'd fail at something, every minute, every sentence you said you'd fail at something. And then seeing the journey of improving and getting better and better. You know, we talk about entrepreneurs need to have that conviction that they can do anything. Like that taught me I can do anything. Like if I can do one of the hardest languages in the world, I can do a business.
Brilliant. Yeah, brilliant. What a great way of looking at it. And I obviously fascinated with that. Funnily enough, and you might be able to confirm or deny, we were talking with a lot of my business coaching colleagues this last week, and there's a phrase that we use which I believe translates as purpose, or certainly means purpose, which is Japanese, I think, which is ikigai. Does that ring a bell? Is that what I'm right in saying that?
Yeah, and I have read that in business books. Like it's not a term that gets used day to day in everyday speech, It's kind of one of these deeper words. Like there's other words for like purpose that would use more colloquially, but yeah, I do think there's so much value in taking concepts from other languages that have a richness compared to that word in your own language, and start to understand that. And we're going to get distracted if I talk about this, but I'm going to say it anyway, that it was really like until I learned Japanese, my whole world was English. And it was such a fascinating experience to learn such a different language where whole concepts were just not translatable at all, both ways. Like there's stuff we do in English that you just can't do in Japanese. There's stuff you do in Japanese, you just can't do it in English. And that really taught me how even our framework of reality is bounded by the constraints of the language you speak. And that even in of itself is a really fascinating thing to think about.
Absolutely is. Absolutely is. And the reason that thought come to mind, Abe, was Japanese side, but I have to say, and I really thank you for coming on and talking to us. His purpose. When I thought of their purpose, clearly you've got a massively huge purpose in what you're doing, and that comes through. And that for me is going to be a foundation. He's already a foundation for your success.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember now you asked me like what's coming up, what in the future, and I talked about the challenges, but I think it does relate to that purpose. We started this conversation saying what does Glean do, and rather than talk about like what the software actually does, it's like, well, what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to help people have the confidence, motivation, and ability to learn effectively. Towards the end of last year, I created our 4-year goals, which are quite aspirational, but part of that is improve learning for over 1 million people, to be contributors to the global edtech education community. It probably sounds a bit obvious, but like helping people learn better, learning how to learn is something that I just don't think has enough attention when people talk about education. And I'm utterly convicted that like it is the Pareto principle, right? 20% of effort is going to get you 80% of the benefit. And we're not even doing that 20%. So like for me, this is one of the biggest ways we can impact learning on a global scale, especially because the constraint to learning now is not access to information, which it used to be. That's why we had schools and educational establishments and teachers. Like that's not the paradigm we're operating in anymore. So like if we accept that, what is the future and what are the problems in the future, and how do we address those before they even become problems? And that's what we're trying to do. And I think the final thing to say on our kind of growth ambition, I'm not certain on the steps to achieve these goals. As I said, like the world's in flux, and as an organization, we need to work out what that journey looks like. But one of the things I'm really keen to do is not just stay in the kind of the realm of Western developed English speaking markets, because our purpose for me is impact, and the life and education of someone in the UK, that's really important. I'm not saying it's not, but we are kind of privileged with access to a decent quality of education, especially when compared to people in developing countries. And I do see there are massive opportunities for impact there. So one of our 4-year goals is to sell into and even maybe have operations within non-English speaking emerging markets. And I think also like any ideal kind of also needs to be grounded in reality. We can all dream of living in a utopia. We all know how we wish the world would be. We are constrained by the facts of reality. And as a business person, like your business needs to be sustainable. It absolutely has to be. So you have to make decisions that are going to lead to sustainability. But I do think that emerging markets are a great opportunity for businesses, because there's often a jump when in development. So if you're, and this is, let's take a business context. Let's say it's often true that the first to market doesn't ultimately own that market.
Yep.
You think of like even the iPod, was that the first MP3 player? No, it wasn't. And often, I don't think Uber was even the first ride-sharing application.
I don't think so.
No. So you kind of, someone has to pioneer it, and then people look at that, they learn from the mistakes, and then often there's a jump. And there's another example of, China doesn't really use credit cards. Why? Because they didn't develop the infrastructure. They went from a cash-based society to a mobile payment QR-based society.
Yep.
And then all of that infrastructure, all of that energy in the middle is just not required. And actually, we don't have the ease of payment that China has. I don't know if you've been to China with their WePay and QR codes, because we have these massive institutions and networks that everyone has a vested interest in maintaining and sustaining. So what does that mean? Well, you stay behind. Same for our infrastructure and like the rail system. Japan has had high-speed rail since the 60s.
Yep.
We're investing in one now that's not going to be built for maybe a decade. Well, I don't know if that's the transportation of the future. But because we had an existing rail system, it's very hard to then do the new, better thing, right? Okay, so these are the analogies to say, I think there's business opportunities for people thinking in new areas where people are making those step leaps. And I think when it comes to learning, we have a great opportunity to make that step leap in emerging markets. So I don't know what that looks like. We're probably not going to work on it for a few years, but that's definitely part of the vision.
Wow. Well, look, I'd love to come back in 6, 12, 18 months and have another chat and just see where you've gone, because I clearly, I just want to thank you for a very interesting, informative and very inspiring conversation. And I would wish you luck. I just don't think you need it. So
We've established we need luck. I think that's going to be required.
But as we said, you sort of make your own, don't you? I think Liverpool football team used to say that, the harder we train, the luckier we get, and I think that's the one thing. So thank you so much, Dave. It's been a real pleasure, and as I say, maybe we can come back in 12 months and see where you and Glean are then.
Thank you so much for having me. I'd love that.
Thank you.